Play for food. What is this, a circus act? Richard Sterling's sneer could have frozen hell itself. The homeless black girl hunched over the battered piano, looked up, her torn gloves barely covering trembling fingers. Sterling nudged his wife Miranda, both of them staring at Isabella Washington like she was a zoo exhibit. Look at this one, honey. She thinks she's a musician. Around Grand Central Terminal, commuters began forming a circle. Sterling pulled out his phone, thumb hovering over the record. Tell you what, street girl, he continued, dropping a crumpled dollar at her feet. I'm feeling generous today. There's a real piano at the hotel across the street. Steinway Grand, $50,000. Isabella's cardboard sign read, help a music student. Her coin cup held loose change and a few bills. If you can actually play something worth listening to, I'll make it worth your while. Sterling's finger hit record, but when you embarrass yourself, don't say I didn't warn you. Have you ever been challenged to prove your worth just to survive? Isabella Washington wasn't always the girl people crossed the street to avoid. 2 years ago, she wore black concert dresses and performed at Carnegie Hall as a student showcase. Her hands, now cracked and stained, once flew across ivory keys in perfect precision. The same fingers that Sterling had just mocked, were trained at Manhattan School of Music on a full scholarship, the pride of her working-class family. The fall began with a phone call at 2 a.m. during her junior year. Baby, it's Mama. Her mother's voice trembled through the phone. The doctors found something. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The words hit Isabella like a freight train. Treatment would cost over $200,000. Their insurance company, Safeguard Health, took one look at her mother's file and stamped it with those soul-crushing words. Pre-existing condition, claim denied. Isabella's father, Marcus, worked double shifts at the Ford plant, his hands permanently stained with motor oil. Her mother, Denise, had been a nurse for 15 years at Brooklyn Methodist. They'd saved every penny for Isabella's future, believing their daughter would lift the family into a better life. The choice came down to Isabella's dreams, or her mother's life. She dropped out 3 days later. What followed was a blur of medical appointments, insurance appeals, and desperation. Isabella worked 3 jobs, waitressing at a diner from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., cleaning offices from 3 p.m. to 8 p.m. and walking dogs until midnight. Every dollar went to treatments that bought time but not hope. The family sold everything. Their modest house in Queens, paid off after 20 years of mortgage payments, went on the market. Marcus cashed out his retirement fund, taking the tax penalties. Isabella sold her grandmother's pearl necklace, the one she'd planned to wear at her wedding someday. They borrowed against credit cards, took payday loans, accepted charity from their church. Isabella watched her father age 10 years in 6 months, his shoulders bending under the weight of watching his wife waste away while their financial world crumbled. Then Marcus had the stroke, the stress, the sleepless nights, the constant worry. His body simply gave up. Isabella found him collapsed in the hospital waiting room, still clutching the latest medical bill. The man who'd worked every day since he was 16 couldn't even remember his daughter's name when she held his hand in the ICU. For 18 months, Isabella fought a war on 2 fronts. Days spent caring for her dying mother, nights sitting beside her father as he struggled to relearn basic words. She slept in hospital chairs, lived on vending machine food, and slowly watched herself disappear. Her mother died on a Tuesday morning in February, holding Isabella's hand and whispering, "Don't let them make you small, baby girl. Your gift isn't yours to hide." The funeral cost $12,000 they didn't have. When the bills came due, the banks showed no mercy. The house was foreclosed. Marcus, broken by grief and brain damage, couldn't work again. Social services placed him in a state facility for long-term care, where he stared at windows and didn't recognize visitors. At 26, Isabella owned nothing but the clothes on her back and her mother's wedding ring, a thin gold band she refused to sell, no matter how hungry she got. The first night on the streets, she cried until her chest ached. By the 3rd week, tears felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. She learned which subway stations stayed warm, which security guards looked the other way, and which restaurant dumpsters had the freshest discards. She'd been homeless for 8 months now. The piano in Grand Central became her lifeline. Someone had donated the old upright to provide ambiance for commuters. Most people ignored it, but Isabella saw salvation. Her fingers remembered every scale, every piece she'd mastered. Muscle memory didn't care about her address. She made $10 to $15 on good days, enough for a shower at the YMCA and a meal that wasn't from a garbage can. On bad days, when security chased her away, or when her hands were too stiff from cold, she went hungry. But she never stopped playing. Every morning she'd remove her fingerless gloves knitted by her mother 3 Christmases ago and let her hands remember what they were born to do. Bach, Chopin, Mozart. The music lived in her bones, unbroken by circumstances. Isabella kept her mother's voice alive through every note. Today felt different, though, heavier. Like the universe was setting up some cosmic test she wasn't sure she'd pass. She'd been playing for an hour when Sterling's group approached, their expensive shoes clicking against the marble floor like countdown timers. She could smell their privilege. Cologne that cost more than she made in a month, leather that had never seen rain, confidence that had never faced real consequences. The way they looked at her like she was part of the architecture rather than a human being made her stomach clench. She'd seen that look before from insurance executives, bank officers, social workers. The look that said, "You're exactly where you deserve to be." Isabella's hands stilled on the keys. Her cardboard sign leaned against the piano bench, edges softened from frequent handling. The words, "Help a music student," felt increasingly like a lie. What kind of student was she now? What school would take someone who smelled like subway tunnels and hadn't had a permanent address in 8 months? But when her fingers touched the keys again, something magical happened. For just a moment, she wasn't homeless Isabella, begging for change. She was the girl who'd once made her parents cry with joy at her first recital. She was the scholarship recipient who dreamed of Lincoln Center debuts and international tours. Music didn't care about her circumstances. It only cared about the truth. The tourists photographing the information board moved on. The businessman checking his phone hurried past, but Sterling's group stayed, circling like sharks who'd caught the scent of blood. Isabella kept playing, her mother's wedding ring catching what little light filtered through the terminal's windows. The thin gold band was all she had left of the life she'd lost. But it reminded her of something crucial. She was still Denise Washington's daughter. Still the girl who'd earned a full ride to one of the world's most prestigious music schools. Still the artist her mother had died believing in. The music floating from her fingertips said what her voice couldn't. "I'm still here. I'm still worthy. I still matter." Sterling stepped closer, his shadow falling across the piano keys like a warning. Richard Sterling III had never worked a day in his life, and it showed in everything he touched. His great-grandfather built the Sterling fortune in railroad steel. His grandfather expanded it through Manhattan real estate. His father had multiplied it through strategic mergers and political connections. Richard's contribution to the family legacy was spending it with the refined efficiency of someone born to power. At 45, he stood 6 feet 2 in handmade Italian shoes that cost more than most people's monthly rent. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his teeth professionally whitened, his skin pampered by treatments available only to Manhattan's elite. The Rolex on his wrist could buy a house, the suit on his back could fund a college education. But it was his eyes that revealed his true nature. Cold, calculating, and completely convinced of his own superiority, Sterling served on the boards of 5 cultural institutions, not out of love for the arts, but because philanthropy was the family business. Tax write-offs disguised as generosity. Photo opportunities masquerading as compassion. The Sterling name appeared on plaques throughout the city, each one a monument to money rather than genuine care. His wife Miranda clung to his arm like an expensive accessory, which was essentially what she was. 20 years younger, surgically enhanced, and intellectually vacant. She provided the trophy wife image his social circle demanded. Her job was to look beautiful, spend appropriately, and never have an opinion that contradicted his. "Richard, darling," Miranda whispered as they approached Isabella's piano. "Isn't this rather sad?" She spoke like poverty was a communicable disease she might catch through proximity. Sterling's entourage formed behind them. Investment banker James Morrison, real estate developer Patricia Blackwood, and attorney David Carter. They moved as a unit, their collective net worth approaching $500 million. They were the people who decided which artists received grants, which musicians got opportunities, which dreams lived or died. They were also the people who'd never struggled for anything in their lives. Sterling had been in a particularly vindictive mood since the morning's board meeting. The Manhattan Arts Foundation, which he chaired, had been pressured to increase funding for community outreach programs. Translation: they wanted him to give money to street musicians, homeless artists, and other people he considered beneath notice. Throwing money at mediocrity, he'd complained to the board. Real talent rises on its own merit. Everything else is just charity case sob stories. Now watching Isabella hunched over the battered piano, he saw the perfect opportunity to prove his point. Look at this, he murmured to his group loud enough for Isabella to hear. Street performance at its finest. Morrison chuckled, adjusting his gold cufflinks. I thought they banned panhandling in the terminal. Technically, she's not panhandling, Patricia observed with clinical detachment. She's providing a service poorly, but still. Sterling pulled out his phone, a latest model device that cost more than Isabella made in 3 months. His thumb hovered over the camera app as a cruel idea crystallized in his mind. You know what this city needs, he announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. A reality check about what passes for talent these days. Isabella's hands faltered on the keys. She looked up, meeting Sterling's gaze for the first time. Her eyes held a combination of weariness and dignity that irritated him. She should be grateful for his attention, not looking at him. Like an equal. Please, Isabella said quietly. I'm just trying to make enough for what? Sterling interrupted, stepping closer. Your next fix, your next bottle. Let me guess, you're a music student who just needs a few more dollars to get back on your feet. The cruelty in his voice made several passing commuters slow down, sensing drama about to unfold. Sterling noticed the gathering audience and felt energized. Nothing thrilled him more than a captive crowd watching him demonstrate his superiority. Miranda giggled behind her manicured fingers. Richard, you're terrible, but her tone suggested she found his behavior entertaining rather than appalling. Sterling began recording, his phone aimed at Isabella like a weapon. Tell you what, street musician, he said, his voice carrying the mock generosity of someone about to pull away a chair someone was trying to sit in. I'm feeling charitable today. He gestured toward this magnificent hotel visible through the terminal's windows, its crystal chandeliers glinting like stars in the distance. There's a real piano over there. Steinway grand, worth more than you'll see in a lifetime. His smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Charity gala, real musicians, real money. Isabella's grip tightened on her mother's wedding ring, the thin gold band catching the light. If you think you can actually play, Sterling continued, prove it where it matters. In front of people who understand quality. The circle of onlookers grew larger, phones emerging from pockets like flowers blooming toward sunlight. Sterling fed off their attention, his voice growing stronger and more commanding. Unless, of course, you prefer your little corner here, he sneered, playing for food like a trained animal. The words hit Isabella like physical blows, but she held his gaze steady. That's when Sterling knew he had her exactly where he wanted her. The crowd sensed blood in the water. What started as a handful of curious commuters had grown into a semicircle of 30 people, phones already recording. The evening rush hour provided perfect timing. Hundreds of potential witnesses streaming through Grand Central, many slowing their pace when they spotted the confrontation brewing near the piano. Sterling fed off the attention like oxygen. He positioned himself directly in front of Isabella, his expensive shoes planted wide in a power stance that screamed dominance. His phone remained trained on her face, capturing every flicker of emotion for his growing audience. Come on now, he said, his voice projecting with the confidence of a man who'd never faced real consequences. Don't keep us waiting, show these good people what a music student can really do. Isabella's hands remained frozen above the piano keys. She could feel the weight of every stare, the pressure of every recording device pointed in her direction. Her cardboard sign suddenly felt like a scarlet letter, marking her as someone who belonged on the margins of society. I just need enough money for food, she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the terminal's ambient noise. Food, Miranda's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. How quaint, Richard, she thinks this is about food. Sterling's grin widened, revealing teeth that had never known anything but the best dental care. Oh, sweetheart, this stopped being about food the moment you claimed to be a musician. He gestured grandly toward the hotel across the street, its golden lights visible through the terminal's towering windows. See that building? Tonight, they're hosting the Metropolitan Arts Foundation Gala. 500 of the city's most influential people, a $50,000 Steinway that's been tuned by the same technician who services Carnegie Hall. The crowd murmured appreciatively. Several people craned their necks to get a better view of the hotel Sterling was describing. Real musicians are performing tonight, Sterling continued, his voice dripping with theatrical generosity. People with actual training, actual talent, actual worth. Each word was designed to cut, and Isabella felt them like razor blades, but beneath the humiliation, something else was stirring. Her mother's voice carried on the memory of countless conversations about dignity and self-worth. If you truly believe you belong in their company, Sterling said, pulling a money clip from his jacket pocket and making a show of counting $100 bills, then prove it. The sight of more cash than Isabella had seen in months made several onlookers gasp. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Holy, he's serious." $1,000, Sterling announced, holding the bills up like a game show prize. "Play one piece on that Steinway, just one, something worthy of the instrument and the audience." Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs. $1,000 could change everything. Rent a room for weeks, buy real food, get her life back on track. But the catch was coming. She could see it in Sterling's predatory smile. "When you fail," he continued, his tone shifting from mock generosity to cold certainty. "When you embarrass yourself in front of New York's cultural elite, you admit what we both know is true." He leaned closer, his expensive cologne mixing with the subway air like oil on water. "You're not a musician, you're just another homeless person with delusions." The crowd pressed closer, sensing the climax approaching. Isabella could hear whispers rippling through the group. "This is insane. Someone should call security. Is this legal? Keep recording. This is going viral." Sterling's phone captured every moment, his thumb steady on the record button. "What's it going to be, street girl? Ready to play with the big kids?" Isabella looked down at her hands, calloused, dirty, wearing gloves with holes that her dead mother had knitted with love. These hands had once danced across conservatory pianos, had earned standing ovations from professors who'd trained at Juilliard and Curtis. These hands remembered everything, even if the world had forgotten her. "The piece would be my choice?" she asked, her voice gaining strength. "Your funeral," Sterling smirked. "Pick whatever fantasy you think you can pull off." Isabella stood slowly, her joints stiff from sitting on the hard piano bench. Around her, the crowd held its collective breath. Phones adjusted angles to capture her full form. The torn sweater, the worn jeans, the sneakers held together with duct tape. She looked Sterling directly in the eye, seeing her own reflection in his cold pupils. For a moment, she wasn't 28-year-old Isabella Washington, homeless and forgotten. She was every artist who'd ever been dismissed, every dreamer who'd been told they weren't good enough, every person who'd been judged by their circumstances rather than their soul. "Bach's Goldberg Variations," she said clearly. "The complete cycle." The classical music lovers in the crowd exchanged glances. Someone whispered, "That's over an hour of music." Sterling's confidence flickered for just a moment. "Complete what now?" 30 variations on a single theme, Isabella explained, her teacher's voice emerging from somewhere deep inside. One of the most technically demanding pieces in the classical repertoire. She gathered her few possessions, the cardboard sign, the empty coin cup. Her mother's memory wrapped in determination. "Lead the way, Mr. Sterling. Let's see what your Steinway can do." The walk across the street felt like crossing into another universe. Isabella's worn sneakers squeaked against the marble lobby of the Grand Meridian Hotel, each step echoing in the cathedral-like space. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead like frozen fireworks, casting rainbow prisms across walls lined with original artwork worth more than entire neighborhoods. The contrast was devastating. Her reflection in the polished surfaces showed exactly what she was, a homeless woman in clothes that hadn't seen a washing machine in weeks, surrounded by luxury that existed in a different dimension from her reality. The hotel staff's eyes followed her movement with the practiced concern of people trained to spot threats to their clientele's comfort. Sterling strode ahead like a conquering general, his entourage trailing behind in perfect formation. "She's with me," he announced to the security guard whose hand had been drifting toward his radio. "Special entertainment for tonight's gala." The word entertainment hit Isabella like a slap, but she kept walking. Through the lobby's floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the gala in full swing. Women in evening gowns that cost more than cars glided across a ballroom floor, while men in custom tuxedos discussed deals worth millions. The Steinway sat on a raised platform in the center, gleaming under spotlights like a black diamond. It was the same model she'd trained on at Manhattan School of Music. Her fingers twitched involuntarily, muscle memory awakening after months of silence. She knew how that piano would feel, the precise weight of each key, the subtle responsiveness that separated a true instrument from the battered upright she'd been playing for pocket change. "Second thoughts?" Sterling asked, noticing her hesitation. Isabella closed her eyes and felt her mother's presence wash over her like warm sunlight. She could almost hear Denise Washington's voice speaking the words that had carried her through her darkest moments. "Your gift isn't yours to hide, baby girl. It belongs to the world, and the world needs to hear it." When Isabella opened her eyes, something fundamental had shifted. Her posture straightened, pulling her shoulders back despite the weight of exhaustion and hunger. Her chin lifted, meeting Sterling's gaze without flinching. The homeless girl who'd been begging for change began to disappear, replaced by the artist who'd once commanded stages. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice carrying a quiet authority that surprised even her. "Some things can't be bought with money. Some things can't be measured by circumstance. Some things just are." She looked through the ballroom windows at the piano, waiting in its pool of light. "Tonight you're going to learn the difference between having wealth and possessing worth." Sterling's smirk faltered for the first time since this began. Isabella Washington walked toward the ballroom doors, no longer following him, but leading her own way to the confrontation that would define everything. The girl who played for food was about to become the woman who played for her soul. The ballroom fell silent the moment Isabella walked in. 500 of Manhattan's elite turned as one, their conversations dying mid-sentence. Designer gowns rustled like autumn leaves as necks craned for a better view. The woman approaching the Steinway looked like she'd wandered in from another century or another tax bracket entirely. Isabella felt their stares like physical weight, each gaze cataloging her torn sweater, her worn jeans, her sneakers held together with duct tape. Whispers rippled through the crowd like water disturbed by a stone. "Who was that? How did she get in here? Is this some kind of performance art?" Sterling bounded onto the stage with the showmanship of a carnival barker, his arms spread wide to embrace his captive audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome tonight's special entertainment." His voice boomed through the sound system, amplified by microphones. "Worth more than most people's cars. This young lady believes she's a classical pianist. She's offered to demonstrate her talents on our beautiful Steinway." Nervous laughter scattered through the crowd. Someone in the back called out, "This should be interesting." Isabella stepped onto the platform, her legs trembling, not from fear, but from the strange electricity that comes when destiny arrives. Wearing work clothes, the piano bench seemed impossibly far away, like the final mile of a marathon she'd been running her entire life. She sat down and immediately felt home. The bench height was perfect. The pedals fell naturally under her feet. Her hands hovered over keys that gleamed like black and white teeth, perfectly weighted, magnificently tuned. This was what a real piano felt like. Responsive, alive, waiting to sing. "Take your time," Sterling announced with mock magnanimity. "We're all very curious to hear what a street musician considers worthy of a $50,000 instrument." Isabella closed her eyes and let the world disappear. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she found her mother's face. Denise Washington smiled back at her, young and healthy and proud, wearing the blue dress she'd been buried in. "Show them, baby girl. Show them who you really are." Isabella's hands found the keys. The opening notes of Bach's Goldberg variations floated into the air like dandelion seeds on a summer breeze. The aria, 32 measures of pure mathematical beauty, melody intertwined with harmony and patterns that had survived 3 centuries because they spoke directly to the human soul. Her fingers were stiff from cold, uncertain from months without practice. The first few measures wavered slightly, like a voice finding its pitch after a long silence. In the audience, Sterling's grin widened. Several people shifted uncomfortably, already reaching for their phones to record what they assumed would be a spectacular failure. But Isabella's hands remembered. Muscle memory etched into her nervous system through 10,000 hours of practice began to assert itself. Her fingers warmed, loosened, and found their natural positions. The melody steadied, gained confidence, and began to soar. By measure 16, the whispers had stopped. The aria concluded with a delicate trill that hung in the air like incense. Isabella paused for exactly 1 beat, the traditional space between the theme and its first variation, then launched into variation 1. This was where technical skill separated musicians from mere key pressers. Bach had written 30 variations of increasing complexity, each one a mathematical puzzle wrapped in gorgeous melody. Isabella's fingers began to dance. Variation 1 flowed into variation 2, then 3, each one more intricate than the last. Her right hand carried melodies that sparkled like scattered diamonds, while her left provided basslines that anchored the harmony to earth. The notes tumbled over each other in cascading runs that should have been impossible for human fingers to execute. But Isabella had practiced these pieces until they lived in her bones. The crowd was no longer watching a homeless woman embarrass herself. They were witnessing something rare and precious. True artistry unleashed. Several people in the front rows leaned forward, straining to see how her fingers moved so quickly yet so precisely. Others pulled out phones, not to mock, but to capture something beautiful. Variation 5, the first of Bach's canons, sent chills through the ballroom. Isabella's hands created the illusion of multiple voices singing together, each melody line distinct yet harmonically connected. It was musical architecture built from mathematics and emotion in equal measure. Sterling's confident smirk began to crack. He'd expected amateur fumbling, wrong notes, obvious technical limitations that would justify his cruelty. Instead, he was hearing graduate-level performances that belonged on any concert stage in the world. His phone, still recording, captured his own growing discomfort rather than Isabella's failure. Variation 10 arrived like a thunderclap. Bach had marked it Fuguetta, a little fugue that required the pianist to juggle multiple melodic themes simultaneously. Isabella's hands flew across the keyboard, her left hand stating the main theme while her right answered in a different key. Then both hands working together to weave the themes into intricate patterns that seemed impossible until they happened. The audience was transfixed. Conversations had died completely. Even the servers stopped moving, frozen by music that demanded absolute attention. Dr. Catherine Carter, Professor Emeritus at Juilliard and tonight's guest of honor, pushed through the crowd toward the front. She'd spent 40 years training the world's finest pianists, and she recognized mastery when she heard it. Her eyes were wide with disbelief. "My God," she whispered to her companion. "Where did she study?" Variation 15. The Andante in G minor arrived like a prayer offered in a cathedral. This was the emotional heart of the entire work, marked by Bach himself as a moment of profound reflection. Isabella's touch became gossamer light, each note floating in space before dissolving into the next. Her face, visible in profile to half the audience, showed the transcendent concentration of an artist completely absorbed in her craft. Several people in the crowd were crying. Sterling looked around wildly, sensing his control of the situation slipping away like sand through his fingers. This wasn't going according to plan. The homeless girl was supposed to fail spectacularly, proving his point about the correlation between social status and actual worth. Instead, she was making him look like a fool. Variation 20 exploded from the piano like fireworks. Bach had written it as a display piece designed to showcase technical virtuosity at its most dazzling. Isabella's hands became blurs of motion, executing runs and arpeggios that pushed the boundaries of human capability. Notes cascaded in torrents of sound that should have been chaotic, but instead revealed deeper patterns of stunning beauty. The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause before catching themselves. You don't interrupt a performance of this caliber, even when every instinct screams to express amazement. Variation 25, the Black Pearl, as pianists called it, brought absolute silence to the ballroom. This was Bach at his most emotionally raw, a meditation on loss and longing that seemed to speak directly from Isabella's shattered life. Her touch found colors in the piano that most players never discovered, drawing sounds that seemed to come from the instrument's soul rather than its strings. Isabella was no longer conscious of her surroundings. She transcended the hotel ballroom, the hostile crowd, the humiliating circumstances that had brought her here. She existed only in the music, channeling something larger than herself through fingers that had learned to speak in Bach's mathematical poetry. Sterling stood frozen at the edge of the stage, his recording hand trembling slightly. His wife Miranda stared at him with an expression he'd never seen before. Disappointment mixed with something that might have been shame. The final variations approached like a symphony reaching its crescendo. Isabella's technique had warmed completely now, her fingers moving with the fluid precision of water finding its natural course. Every note landed exactly where Bach had intended, yet infused with emotional truth that came from a life that had known real suffering. Variation 30, the Quodlibet, arrived like joy breaking through storm clouds. Bach had written it as a celebration, weaving popular songs of his era into the mathematical structure with playful genius. Isabella's performance sparkled with wit and warmth, her touch light as butterfly wings, yet commanding as thunder. Then came the return of the aria. The same 32 measures that had opened the work, but transformed by the journey they'd taken together. What had begun as simple melody now carried the weight of everything that had come before, 30 variations of technical mastery, emotional depth, and pure musical truth. Isabella's hands settled into the final measures like a bird coming home to roost. Each note hung in the air with crystalline clarity, then dissolved into silence that felt sacred. The last chord faded to nothing. Isabella's hands remained poised above the keys for one eternal moment, then slowly came to rest in her lap. She opened her eyes and returned to the world, seeing 500 faces staring back at her in absolute thunderstruck silence. The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats. 4, 5, then the ballroom exploded. Retry. The applause hit like a tsunami. 500 people erupted simultaneously, their voices blending into a roar that shook the crystal chandeliers. Chairs scraped against marble as the entire ballroom rose to its feet. Hands clapped until they stung. Voices shouted, "Bravo!" in languages Isabella didn't recognize. The sound was deafening, overwhelming, and beautiful. Isabella sat frozen at the piano bench, her hands still trembling from the music that had just poured through them. She'd never performed for an audience this large, this sophisticated, this important. The standing ovation rolled over her like ocean waves, washing away months of hunger, humiliation, and despair. In the front row, drive. Catherine Carter pushed through the crowd with tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. The woman who discovered 3 generations of classical superstars reached the stage first, her voice cutting through the applause. "Where did you study?" she demanded, her accent thick with emotion. "That was a graduate-level performance. That was extraordinary." Isabella's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Manhattan School of Music. Before what? Drive." Carter climbed onto the platform, her formal gown forgotten in her urgency to reach Isabella. "Child, you have the touch of angels. Who was your teacher?" "Professor Williams. Until my mother got sick and I had to." Isabella's words dissolved into tears she hadn't realized were falling. "Doctor." Carter's face transformed with understanding and fury. "You had to leave school for my family." She turned to face the crowd, her voice projecting with decades of stage experience. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've just witnessed a masterclass from someone who sacrificed her education to save her family." The applause doubled in intensity. Sterling stood at the edge of the stage like a man watching his execution. His face had cycled through disbelief, anger, and now settled into the pale shock of someone whose worldview was crumbling in real time. The phone in his hand continued recording, but now it captured his own humiliation rather than Isabella's. Miranda Sterling stared at her husband with an expression he'd never seen before, disappointment so deep it looked like disgust. Around them, board members and social elite whispered behind jeweled hands, their judgment shifting from Isabella to the man who'd orchestrated this public cruelty. "Richard," Miranda hissed, her voice cutting through the celebration. "How could you?" But Sterling couldn't answer, his mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. Everything he'd believed about worth, about class, about the correlation between social status and actual value lay shattered at his feet. Isabella rose from the piano bench with new grace, her torn sweater and worn jeans suddenly irrelevant in the face of what she'd just accomplished. The homeless girl who'd begged for change had vanished, replaced by an artist who belonged on any stage in the world. She walked to where Sterling stood frozen, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet ballroom. "Mr. Sterling," she said, each word falling like drops of crystal. "Talent doesn't live in your tax bracket. It doesn't check your address or count your money. It lives here." She touched her heart. "Your $1,000 check can wait, but your apology cannot." The ballroom held its collective breath. Sterling's face flushed red, then white, then red again. 500 pairs of eyes watched his struggle between arrogance and the undeniable evidence of his error. His wife's disgusted stare burned into his peripheral vision. Board members shifted uncomfortably, already calculating damage control. He stammered, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "I apologize. I was wrong." The words came out strangled, inadequate, but they were enough to release the tension that had gripped the room. "Doctor." Carter stepped forward, her arm protective around Isabella's shoulders. "Mr. Sterling, this young woman belongs at Lincoln Center, not playing for pocket change. The Manhattan School of Music will hear about this tonight." She turned to Isabella, her eyes bright with possibility. "Child, how would you feel about finishing your degree? Full scholarship, full support, full recognition of what you've always been, a true artist." Isabella's knees nearly buckled. The future she thought lost forever suddenly blazed before her like sunrise after the longest night. "Yes," she whispered, then stronger. "Yes, please." The applause began again, but gentler now, warmer. This wasn't a celebration of spectacle. It was recognition of justice finally served. The transformation began immediately. "Doctor." Carter guided Isabella off the stage, her protective arm never leaving the younger woman's shoulders. Around them, the gala's energy had completely shifted. What had begun as Sterling's cruel entertainment had become something sacred, a witness to talent reclaiming its rightful place. "First things first, drive," Carter announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making life-changing decisions. "You need a proper meal, a hot shower, and a safe place to sleep tonight." Before Isabella could protest, 3 different women approached with offers. Margaret Rothschild, whose family foundation funded arts education, stepped forward first. My guest suite is available indefinitely, she said simply. It has a piano. The phrase, "it has a piano," broke something open in Isabella's chest. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed the simple luxury of playing whenever inspiration struck, of practicing without worrying about security guards or closing times. James Morrison, the investment banker who'd earlier mocked her, now stood with his checkbook open, his face flushed with what might have been shame. The Morrison Foundation funds emergency assistance for artists in crisis. We'd like to establish an account in your name. Patricia Blackwood, real estate developer and former skeptic, pulled out her phone. I'm calling Meridian's manager. Tonight's room service is on me. Order whatever you want. You look like you haven't eaten properly in months. Isabella felt dizzy from the sudden reversal of fortune. 12 hours ago, she'd been sleeping in Grand Central's tunnels, counting change for her next meal. Now Manhattan's elite were competing to help her. But it was Dr. Carter's next words that truly changed everything. Isabella, I've been teaching for 40 years. I've trained concert, soloists, competition winners, internationally recognized artists. She paused, choosing her words carefully. What you just performed, that wasn't just technical mastery. That was truth speaking through music. That was art at its most pure. The professor pulled out her own phone, scrolling through contacts. I'm calling Dr. Patricia Williams at Manhattan School of Music. She's going to want to hear about tonight. Professor Williams is still there. Isabella's voice caught with emotion. Patricia Williams had been her mentor, the woman who'd fought to get Isabella her original scholarship. Still there, still fighting for students like you. Dr. Carter's eyes sparkled with anticipation. She never forgot the student who disappeared in her junior year. She's going to be thrilled to learn you're alive and ready to finish what you started. Around them, the gala continued, but with Isabella as its new center of gravity. People approached respectfully, offering everything from performance opportunities to mentorship. The Metropolitan Arts Foundation board members, Sterling's former allies, huddled in urgent conversation about distance and damage control. Miranda Sterling appeared at Isabella's side, her earlier smirk replaced by genuine remorse. I owe you an apology, too, she said quietly. We were cruel, unnecessarily cruel. She pressed a business card into Isabella's hand. My personal stylist, my treat. You'll need appropriate attire for the opportunities coming your way. The gesture was practical but profound. Recognition that Isabella's circumstances, not her worth, had dictated her appearance. A young woman with a press badge pushed through the crowd, her recorder raised hopefully. Sarah Martinez, Art Section, New York Times. Could I possibly arrange an interview? This story, a homeless classical pianist discovered at a charity gala. It's extraordinary. Dr. Carter fielded the request protectively. Tomorrow afternoon after she's had time to process tonight and make some calls. But the most meaningful moment came when hotel security approached, not to escort Isabella out, but to return something she'd left behind. The guard held her cardboard sign, the one that had read, "Help a music student." Ma'am, you left this piano downstairs. Isabella took the battered piece of cardboard, studying the words she'd written in desperate hope so many mornings ago. Help a music student. The universe had listened after all, just not in any way she could have imagined. She looked around at the faces surrounding her. Dr. Carter with her fierce protective energy. Margaret Rothschild already planning practical support. Even Miranda Sterling offering genuine assistance. These weren't the same people who'd ignored her when she was begging for change. Money hadn't transformed them. Witnessing authentic talent had reminded them of something they'd forgotten. Professor Carter, Isabella said, her voice growing stronger with each word. When can I start classes again? Monday, if you want. We'll arrange everything. Transcripts, financial aid, housing. The only question is whether you're ready to work harder than you've ever worked in your life. Isabella thought of her mother's wedding ring on her finger, the weight of dreams deferred but not destroyed. She thought of the music that had lived in her hands even when she had nowhere to lay her head. I've been ready for 2 years, she said simply. Dr. Carter smiled at the smile of a teacher who just found her next protege. Then welcome back to your life, Isabella Washington. The real one starts now. Across the ballroom, Sterling retreated with his remaining dignity, his empire of easy superiority shattered by 32 bars of botch and a woman who'd refused to stay invisible. Justice had arrived wearing fingerless gloves and carrying nothing but truth. 6 months later, Isabella Washington walked onto the stage at Lincoln Center wearing her mother's wedding ring and a midnight blue gown that caught the spotlight like starlight. The program listed her as Isabella Washington Manhattan School of Music Senior Recital. No mention of homelessness, no reference to charity cases or second chances, just her name, her school, and her art. In the third row, drive. Carter dabbed tears from her eyes. Margaret Rothschild sat beside her, having quietly funded a scholarship in Isabella's mother's name. Even Miranda Sterling had come, her husband notably absent. Their divorce had been finalized 3 weeks ago. But the front row seat remained empty by choice. Isabella had placed a single white rose there, a symbol for the woman who taught her that gifts aren't meant to be hidden. As Isabella's hands found the familiar opening of Bach's Goldberg variations, she remembered that night at the Grand Meridian, how close she'd come to believing Sterling's version of her worth, how near she'd been to accepting that circumstances define character. The music that flowed from her fingers told a different story entirely. It spoke of talent that survives tragedy, of worth that exists independent of wealth, of dignity that can't be destroyed by cruelty or circumstance. Each note carried the truth her mother had whispered. Some things just are. Regardless of who tries to tell you otherwise, talent doesn't discriminate. It doesn't check your address, count your money, or judge your circumstances. It only asks one question. Will you let it shine? Because when an authentic gift meets genuine opportunity, the impossible becomes inevitable. When real artistry encounters true recognition, miracles happen in broad daylight. Every person struggling tonight might be a genius waiting for discovery. Every dream deferred might be destiny delayed, not destroyed. Every broken soul might carry a masterpiece the world desperately needs to hear. The question isn't who deserves a chance. The question is who deserves the power to decide who gets one. What gifts are you hiding because someone convinced you that you don't belong? When did you last see potential instead of problems in someone the world overlooks? What would happen if you gave your own talents one more chance to surprise everyone, including yourself? Your story might be one note away from changing everything. If Isabella's journey moved you, subscribe for more incredible tales of hidden greatness transforming the world. Next week, the janitor who solved Mitt's impossible equation. You won't believe what happens when a genius wears a uniform nobody notices. Hit that subscribe button if you believe everyone deserves a chance to show their true gifts. Share this with someone who needs to remember their own power is still there waiting. What's your hidden talent? Tell us in the comments below. Your story might be our next video. Because in a world obsessed with appearances, we're here to reveal what really matters.